They say everyone has a breaking point. Mine didn't happen in a courtroom or on a hospital bed. It happened on the corner of Fairmont and 3rd, right outside a discount grocery store, in front of a dozen strangers who pretended I didn't exist. One moment I was fumbling for my keys. The next, whoosh. A wall of dirty water slapped me across the chest and face, thrown up by the spinning tires of a blood-red Ferrari. I didn't see the driver. Just the sleek blur of money and power speeding away like the rest of the world always had. My canvas tote hit the pavement, cans rolled into the gutter, coupons fluttered like dead leaves. I just stood there, soaked and shivering, watching the puddle ripple where the car had passed. And then, I broke. Not because I got wet, not because people stared and kept walking, not even because of the car. It was because I was already crumbling, and this was just the final kick when I was already down. That morning, I'd left home before my daughter woke up. I'd turned the heat off to save on the gas bill, tiptoed past my mom's room, where she now spent most of her days in silence, and told myself today had to be better. I was wrong. By noon, the school had called. My 10-year-old Ellie had been sent home. Again. "We can't accommodate her needs until you settle the outstanding tuition," they said like it was a broken vending machine, as if my daughter's learning disability was a customer service glitch. Then came the email. "Dear Joanna, due to ongoing restructuring. Restructuring. That's corporate talk for, you're on your own." I hadn't even told my mom yet. I hadn't figured out how to explain that we might lose the apartment before Thanksgiving. And now I was standing in cold, dirty water while a crowd flowed around me like I was nothing but a lamppost, just background noise to their day. That's when I cried. Not a few tears. Not the kind you wipe away with your sleeve. No. This was the kind that comes from too many closed doors and too few answers. The kind of cry that makes your shoulders shake and your throat sting. That makes you forget you're in public, because for once, you just don't care. Still, no one stopped. No one except him. He looked like someone's grandfather. Faded wool coat, silver hair swept back like he still believed in haircuts. No umbrella. No rush. Just a small white handkerchief in his wrinkled hand. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't say sorry. He just looked me straight in the eye, then held out the cloth like it meant something. "Not every door is locked," he said, like he was telling me a secret. "Some just need someone brave enough to knock." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard right. But by the time I opened my mouth, he'd already turned and walked away. No name, no explanation. Just that sentence floating behind him like a trail of breadcrumbs. I stared at the handkerchief in my hand. It was monogrammed, old, maybe even antique. It smelled faintly of cedar and something I couldn't name. Something warm. Something kind. And that's when I heard it. A soft mechanical whir behind me. At the end of the block, half shielded by wrought iron fencing and thick ivy, a tall gate was slowly creaking open. Behind it, I glimpsed a long driveway lined with stone lanterns, and at the far end, partially obscured by mist and trees, was a house. No, not a house. A mansion. I don't know what made me step forward. I just remember the weight of the handkerchief in my fingers, and the way the air shifted around me, like I'd been noticed for the first time in years. And I walked. Not because I was curious, but because when everything else in your life is falling apart, sometimes the craziest door is the only one that doesn't feel shut. I stood there, fingers clenched around the handkerchief like it was the last solid thing in a world that kept slipping through my hands. The man had already walked off, disappearing into the city crowd like a character written out mid-scene. His words echoed louder than the traffic. "Not every door is locked. Some just need someone brave enough to knock." It sounded like something out of a storybook or a fairy tale, And I was no heroine, I was just tired. But then my eyes followed the direction he'd glanced toward, a tall iron gate, half swallowed by ivy, far at the end of the street. It wasn't moving now, but I could swear it had creaked open just moments before. Maybe a gust of wind, maybe my imagination, maybe not. The sidewalk around me had returned to motion. Horns honked, conversations buzzed, tires hissed against wet concrete. But inside me, everything was still. I looked down at the handkerchief again, monogrammed with an R, slightly yellowed with age, soft from too many washes, too many memories. It didn't belong on a city sidewalk. It didn't belong with someone like me, and yet, it had been offered. Not thrown, not dropped. Given. I turned toward the gate. What was I hoping for? A job? A miracle? Just a place to sit without being asked to move? Maybe all I wanted was to believe that a stranger could look at me and see someone worth helping. The closer I got, the quieter the world became. The buzzing city fell behind with each step. The iron gate stood tall, not new, not polished, but solid. Like it had been there long before the buildings around it. Like it had seen things. I reached out. The latch wasn't locked, just resting in place. Like the old man had said. It didn't creak dramatically when I opened it. No lightning strike, no thunderclap. Just a soft groan of metal, like a sigh. The kind of sound a person makes when they finally allow themselves to hope again. Inside was a gravel path, flanked by small trees and thick hedges. Old lanterns lined the way, their glass fogged with time. I half expected someone to shout at me, to ask who I was or what I thought I was doing, but no voice came, no alarms, just the whisper of wind and the crunch of gravel beneath my shoes. And ahead, the house, or rather, the mansion, stood like a memory too big to forget. Brick and stone, wide porches, windows like eyes watching kindly, not judging. There was something timeless about it, not rich in the way that flexes, but in the way that holds. I paused at the bottom step. I could turn back. Still had time to say it was curiosity. Still had time to claim I got lost. But I didn't move. Instead, I thought of Ellie, bright eyes dulled by confusion, sitting home with coloring books because her school turned her away. I thought of my mother, staring out the window as if waiting for something she couldn't name. And I thought of myself, of how long it had been since I felt like I belonged anywhere. I climbed the steps, lifted my hand, and knocked. Once. Firm, not desperate, not demanding, just honest. Because when everything else in your life has shut you out, sometimes the only thing left is to ask, what if this door doesn't? The knock still echoed in my bones when the heavy door finally opened. Not wide, just a cautious crack, revealing a young man in a tailored navy shirt, sleeves rolled, eyes sharp and assessing. He didn't smile. Yes? I cleared my throat, suddenly aware of my wet clothes, my unwashed hair, and the absurdity of standing on a mansion's porch clutching a handkerchief like it was a golden ticket. I was told the gate wasn't locked, I said, voice barely audible. He looked at me like that explained absolutely nothing. Behind him, a deep voice cut through the tension. What's going on, Thomas? The young man stepped aside. And there he was, the old man from the sidewalk. He was taller now. Or maybe it was the setting that made him feel grander. Like he belonged to this place in a way most people never belonged anywhere. Same wool coat, same kind eyes, but his expression had shifted. Less gentle, more surprised. Then he saw the handkerchief in my hand. His face softened. You came, he said. It wasn't a question, more like a quiet acknowledgement, like he'd known I would. She was just at the gate, the young man, Thomas, apparently, explained. still guarded. And she was kind enough to return something I lost. The older man replied, stepping forward. Please, come in. You look like you could use some tea. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Grandfather. It's just tea, Thomas. He didn't wait for me to respond, just turned and walked back into the house, as if it was already settled. I hesitated, half expecting an alarm to sound or someone to physically escort me off the property. But no one did. Thomas lingered in the doorway, watching me like he was bracing for me to steal the silverware. I stepped inside. The air smelled like wood polish, citrus, and something older, something like memory. Warm light filtered through tall windows, catching dust motes that danced like they belonged there. It wasn't flashy, this place. It was kept, loved, lived in, preserved. He led me to a sitting room that looked like it hadn't been redecorated in 50 years, and somehow that made it perfect. A silver tray already sat on a side table as if tea had been inevitable. I'm Richard, he said, pouring 2 cups. You, Joanna. He passed me a cup. Milk? Sugar? I shook my head, fingers trembling slightly as I took the porcelain in my hands. I hadn't held something this delicate in years. I saw you crying, he said gently. I didn't ask why. You didn't need to. He smiled faintly. No, I didn't. But I do wonder what brought you all the way to my gate. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Because what could I say? That I'd lost my job that morning? That my daughter had been suspended for missing too many school days because I couldn't afford childcare? That my mother's pills were running out and the Medicaid paperwork had vanished in a bureaucratic black hole? Or that, honestly, I hadn't come here to return anything. I didn't want to go home yet, I said instead. He nodded like he understood more than I'd said. Maybe more than I knew how to say. From the hallway, I could feel eyes on me, the staff, the family. People wondering who I was, why I was here. But Richard didn't seem to care. You're welcome here, Joanna, he said, raising his cup, at least for tea. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt human. The tea had gone lukewarm in my hands, but neither of us seemed to mind. Richard leaned back slightly, watching me, not with the suspicion I'd grown used to from strangers, but with the curiosity of someone who still believed people were worth discovering. He didn't ask about my resume. He didn't mention background checks or credentials or what I was doing dripping water onto his Persian rug. Instead, he asked, if you could live somewhere for a while, not to work or survive, just be, what would you do with that? It was such a simple question, and yet it landed in me like a stone dropped into still water. I hesitated, because no one ever asked me that, not at the temp agencies, not at the food bank, not in the waiting room at county services, where people stared at clipboards like the right answer might save them. I don't know, I said honestly. He nodded, letting the silence stretch. There was something kind about how he didn't fill it. I took a breath. Maybe I'd stop running, I added quietly. He looked up. I've been running for a long time. From bad relationships, from bills, from the mirror. I've been duct taping my life together for so long, I forgot what stillness feels like. Richard didn't interrupt. He just listened. It made me want to say more. I think, if I had a place to just breathe, I'd write again, I said, more to myself than to him. Not for money, not for someone else, just for me. His eyes lit with something, recognition maybe, or hope. You used to write? I nodded. Before everything. Mostly short essays, little things no one read. He smiled. Well, you're wrong about that. I'm reading you now. I blinked, and something stung behind my eyes that wasn't sadness exactly. After a pause, he said, You know, this house was once full of voices like yours. He gestured vaguely at the walls, the bookshelves. Back in the 70s and 80s, we opened the West Wing to young artists, writers, musicians. Let them stay here a few weeks, find their footing. No rent, no pressure. I stared at him. Why? He sipped his tea, then said simply, because someone once did it for me. I didn't ask more. I didn't have to. Then, without ceremony, he set his teacup down and looked at me directly. Joanna, he said, what if you stayed here? Just for a few days. No strings. A room to yourself. Meals, if you want them. Silence, if you don't. My breath caught. You're offering me a place to stay? I'm offering you a door. You decide if you want to walk through it. I stared at him, half waiting for the catch. But his face held no tricks. Just kindness, edged with sadness, like he'd once stood where I stood now. Why me? I asked. He considered. Because you looked like someone who might stop running if given the chance. For a long moment I said nothing. Just held the cup, cooling between my palms, and let the quiet fill the space that used to be panic. Then I nodded. All right, I whispered. Just for a few days. Richard smiled, like he'd already known that would be my answer. The guest room Richard gave me was at the end of a long hallway, tucked beneath the sloping beams of the attic level. It wasn't fancy, just a narrow bed, a writing desk facing a round window, and a creaky wooden dresser that smelled faintly of cedar and something older, like time itself. But it was clean, warm, safe. That night I slept better than I had in months, and the next morning I woke to birdsong. Real birdsong. Not traffic or sirens or my daughter coughing in her sleep while I stared at the ceiling wondering how to afford antibiotics. I stayed in bed for a few minutes, eyes open, letting the silence wrap around me like a forgotten coat. No one knocked. No one barked orders or reminded me of overdue bills. And for once, I didn't feel the need to explain my presence. But habits die hard. I wandered down to the kitchen mid-morning, half expecting to be told I didn't belong there. Instead, I found the housekeeper. Her name was Carol, peeling carrots in a wide, sunlit kitchen that smelled like rosemary and something baking. She glanced at me but didn't say anything, so I asked, "Need help?" She didn't smile, but she handed me a paring knife. That was the beginning. By noon, we were prepping soup together. She didn't talk much, and neither did I. But there was something comforting in the rhythm of it. Slice, stir, wipe, taste. I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt useful. That afternoon, I passed the upstairs bathroom and noticed the sink dripping. I asked for a wrench. No one stopped me. The next day, I watered the ivy climbing along the back porch. It looked thirsty. Someone should have done it sooner. By the third morning, I'd swept the back stairwell and refilled the sugar jar. I wasn't doing it for anyone. I wasn't trying to earn my keep. There was no keep to earn. I just needed to feel like I mattered. Funny thing about old houses, they start to breathe a little easier when someone pays attention. And slowly, so did I. Richard didn't say much when he saw me setting the table for dinner, just gave me a knowing nod, like he understood more than he let on. I think what surprised them wasn't that I helped, it was that I didn't expect thanks. I didn't act like a guest or a project. I didn't ask for keys or privileges or promises. I just kept showing up. At meals, I sat quietly, listened, watched the way Richard read the newspaper all the way to the end. Not for the headlines, but for the crossword. Watched Carol line the utensils precisely. Watched the way the afternoon light hit the dining room walls like an old memory. There was a rhythm here, soft and slow. Not perfect, but honest. And somehow my presence didn't disrupt it. If anything, the air shifted. A little less stiff. A little more lived in. One evening, after dinner, I caught Richard watching me gently polish the brass handles of a sideboard. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said simply, "The last person who cared enough to do that was a pianist from Michigan. Stayed here in '92, broke 3 strings on the grand upstairs and left a note taped to the lid. I broke something beautiful. I hope I left something better." I smiled. "Did they?" He nodded. "They stayed 3 weeks, then opened a music school in Chicago." I didn't ask why he told me that. I just said, "Sounds like someone who found the right place to stop running." He didn't answer, but he smiled in that quiet, almost invisible way. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't just passing through anymore. The house had noticed me. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to notice myself again too. I first saw him at dusk, just after the sun dipped behind the hedges, leaving the whole estate bathed in gold and shadow. He stepped out of a black car I hadn't heard coming, like the engine was too polite to interrupt. Tall, pressed shirt, sleeves rolled with intention, not comfort. The kind of man who made even gravel sound sharp under his shoes. Derek, Richard's grandson. He didn't acknowledge me at first. Just nodded to the driver and walked straight inside, jaw set like it had been clenched for years. Carol caught me watching. "Don't take it personally," she said under her breath. "He's never liked anyone who doesn't come with a resume." I smiled, pretending I wasn't rattled. Later that evening, Richard invited me to join him for a glass of wine in the library. I sat across from him in a faded armchair near the fireplace, cradling the glass in both hands like it might warm me faster than the flames. He told stories, ones the walls had heard before, about the poet who'd painted quotes on the bathroom tiles, the sculptor who carved angels into firewood, the chef who once baked 100 loaves of bread and gave them all to the homeless shelter downtown. "This house," he said, "has never been about permanence. Just pause. A soft landing. Some people need that more than others." I asked him why he kept offering it. He shrugged. "Because someone once did it for me." When I told him I used to write short essays, little things about weather and waiting rooms and women at bus stops, he leaned in, curious. "And why'd you stop?" I looked into my wine, unsure how to answer. Life got louder than my thoughts. He didn't push, just nodded like he understood. But not everyone was that generous. Later, as I headed up to my room, I passed Derek at the top of the stairs. He didn't move aside, just looked at me like I'd walked through the wrong door in the wrong movie. "This isn't a charity," he said quietly. "It's not some halfway house for lost causes." I opened my mouth, closed it again. There wasn't much to say that wouldn't sound defensive. But he wasn't done. "My grandfather's health is declining. He needs real care, not distractions." I met his gaze and said gently, "He seems to smile more when he talks about those distractions." For a second, just one, something flickered across his face. Surprise? Guilt? Memory? He stepped aside without another word. I didn't cry that night. Not because his words didn't sting. They did. But because they weren't new. I'd heard versions of them my whole life. From teachers, landlords, even people I loved. "You're kind, but kind doesn't pay rent. You mean well, but meaning well doesn't change anything." But here's the thing about kindness. It lingers. The next morning, I found the kitchen already warm, the coffee already brewed. Carol handed me a mug without a word, and someone, though no one admitted who, had placed a small notepad and pen on the table where I usually sat. It was blank, but it was waiting. Like maybe someone thought I still had something worth writing down. It started as a favor. Richard had asked me, almost offhandedly, if I'd be willing to speak to one of Derek's graduate classes, some business and ethics elective he sponsored at a nearby university. "I don't have credentials," I said, half laughing. You have something better, he replied. You've survived with decency. So I agreed. Not because I thought I had anything to teach, but because saying no felt like denying a kindness that had already rooted itself in my bones. Derek wasn't thrilled. This class is full of analysts, not idealists, he muttered as we parked in the faculty lot. I didn't answer. The room was sterile, fluorescent lights, muted carpet, 30 faces behind silver MacBooks. Derek introduced me briefly, then leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. I stood in front of the whiteboard and told them about my Tuesday, how I bought rice in bulk and made 5 different meals out of it, how I used a broken lamp cord to fix my daughter's backpack strap, how I once pawned a necklace my mother gave me to pay for asthma medication. I didn't cry. I didn't dramatize. I just shared. 10 minutes in, someone snorted. A boy in a Patagonia vest raised his hand, not to ask, but to interrupt. So, your advice is to be poor and proud of it? Laughter. Not loud, but sharp enough to make my ears burn. Another girl chimed in, waving her phone. I could Venmo you $10 right now. Would that help? The room broke into chuckles. Derek didn't laugh, but he didn't stop them either. I swallowed. My throat itched. I didn't come here to ask for help, I said, steadying my voice. I came here because your professor believes the way we treat each other still matters. They quieted, just a little. I don't expect you to understand, I added. But one day, maybe, when your perfect plan collapses, and it will, you'll realize that dignity isn't something you can spreadsheet. That should have been the end. But just as I turned to leave, I noticed her. Sitting in the last row. Dark hoodie. Hands clenched in her lap. A single tear ran down her cheek. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't typing. She was crying. And for a moment, just one, I saw myself at 19, when I still believed hard work guaranteed fairness, when I still thought kindness could be enough. After class, I found her waiting outside the building. Her name was Maya. Soft voice, eyes too old for her age. My mom used to say the same things you did, she whispered, until she stopped talking at all. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there. Then she reached into her pocket and handed me a folded note. Thank you for not pretending life is easier than it is. That night, back at the mansion, I sat on the back steps and reread the note under the porch light. Over and over. I thought about those students, their laughter, their arrogance, their ignorance. But I didn't feel angry anymore, because somewhere between their smirks and Maya's tear, I realized something. You don't have to change the whole world. Just one person, one moment of real connection can outshine 1,000 dismissals. I still didn't have a degree. I still didn't own a home. But that day I carried something more valuable than either. Proof that pain, when shared honestly, becomes a bridge instead of a burden. And in a world full of noise, sometimes a quiet truth is the loudest thing there is. It was the morning after my talk at the university. Derek found me in the greenhouse, repotting a plant that had clearly been neglected for years. I thought he'd come to ask how it went. Maybe even thank me for not embarrassing him too badly. Instead, he leaned against the doorway with that same guarded smirk he always wore around me. So, he said, you still think life's about casseroles and handwritten notes? I didn't look up. I think it's about people. He crossed his arms. People who don't work hard enough end up poor. That's just how it is. I set the pot down carefully. You don't actually believe that. You just need to believe it so you can sleep at night. He scoffed. Tell you what, why don't you try living like me for a day? Come to my world. Real pressure. Real decisions. See if you still think empathy pays the bills. I wiped my hands on my apron. Only if you live like me the next day. He laughed, like it was a joke. But when he saw I wasn't backing down, the smile dropped. "You're serious? As a hospital bill?" I said. So we made a pact. Day 1. My turn to be him. I dressed in a borrowed navy sheath and heels I hadn't worn since my last job interview. Derek took me to his gym. Marble floors, eucalyptus towels, machines I'd only seen in magazines. Everyone there looked sculpted, like they'd been born in catalogs. I tried to act natural. I failed. Then came the boardroom. I sat through a 2-hour meeting about market positioning and user friction. I had no idea what either meant, but I nodded when everyone else did. Lunch was a blur of words like cap rates and acquisition flow. By dinner, I was exhausted, not physically, but spiritually. There was something hollow about spending a whole day where no one asked you how you really were. I told Derek as much. He just raised a glass of wine and said, "Welcome to the top." Day 2, his turn to be me. I handed him a list at 6:30 a.m. sharp. Take the bus 2 transfers to the daycare center. Walk 3 blocks to the dollar store. Buy groceries for $15, including tax. Wash and hang laundry by hand. Make dinner with no microwave, no blender, and 1 working burner. Sleep on the living room floor because your daughter has nightmares if she sleeps alone. He blinked. I thought you were exaggerating, he said. I wasn't. By 3 p.m., he looked lost. By 6, he'd burned the rice. At 10, he knocked on the guest house door and handed me a half-melted ice cream sandwich. "Peace offering," he said. I never knew exhaustion could come without doing anything glamorous. I took it and smiled. Now you know. We sat in silence for a while on the back steps, licking at the melting treat like 2 kids who didn't know what to say. Then he asked, "Do you miss it?" "Miss what?" "That life." I thought about it. But I miss the clarity. When you're struggling, you know what matters. You don't get distracted by things that don't. He nodded slowly. And for the first time since we met, Derek didn't look at me like I was beneath him. He looked at me like he wasn't sure he'd measured the world correctly at all. I hadn't planned on spending the next day with Derek, but after our little challenge, something shifted. Not just in him, but in me. That morning, he found me in the kitchen, measuring oats. He didn't mock me for cooking instead of ordering delivery. He just watched, then asked, "Do you want to come with me today?" "To the office?" He shook his head. "Not today. Just everywhere else." I nodded, curious. We started at the rehab center his family helped fund. I expected a photo op or a donation speech. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves and helped install new shelves in the kids' reading room. No cameras, no fanfare. Afterward, we stopped by a small community garden. His mother's old project, he told me. He pulled weeds while an old woman in a sun hat teased him about his soft hands. At lunch, we sat on a bench eating street tacos. His tie was loose, and his hair looked like he'd forgotten to push it back. For once, he looked human. "You're different out here," I said. He didn't respond right away. Just stared at a boy chasing pigeons across the square. "My mom used to bring me here," he said, "before she got sick." I waited. She believed money was a tool, not a trophy. My grandfather raised her that way. But after she died, everything changed. Dad got busier. I got angrier. I could see the grief beneath his sharp edges. Not raw anymore, just scarred over. We walked some more. He took me to a tiny bookshop he helped keep open, a shelter for runaway teens, quiet places, unspoken things. By the time we reached the mansion again, the sun was slipping low. As he parked, I asked, "Why don't you show this side of yourself more?" He looked at me, not defensive this time, just tired. "Because everyone wants something from me. They see a bank account, not a person. I have to be cold. If I'm not, I'll get eaten alive." I touched his wrist gently. You're not cold, Derek. You're just armoring up. But you're still in there. He laughed softly. That obvious? To someone who's worn armor too, yes. He looked away, voice low. I don't hate poor people, Joanna. I hate that I couldn't save my mom, that no amount of money stopped her from slipping away. And I hate how powerless I felt, how I still feel, most days. Something inside me cracked open at that, because I understood. I lost my husband in a car crash. I had no savings, no degree, just a 4-year-old who cried for her dad every night. I didn't hate the world. I just hated that I couldn't fix it. For her. For me. Silence settled between us. Not heavy, but shared. He finally said, So maybe we're both just trying to rescue people who've already left. I nodded. Maybe. He smiled, small, but real. I'm glad you knocked on that door. I almost didn't, I whispered. But you did. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt seen. And maybe. So did he. I didn't own a dress that fit the occasion, but I showed up anyway. The invitation was formal, some charity gala hosted right there at the mansion. I found it taped to my door with a note from Richard. Be brave. Wear anything that feels like you. So I chose the only thing I had, a faded navy blue dress I'd worn to my sister's courthouse wedding 6 years ago. I let my hair down, swiped on old lipstick, and stood in front of the mirror for a long time, second-guessing every inch of myself. But I went. The foyer had been transformed with chandeliers, wine trays, and tuxedos. People milled about with practiced smiles and careful laughter. No one noticed me at first, until they did. Eyes flicked toward me, paused, took in the dress, the plain flats, the woman who clearly didn't belong. Someone near the piano whispered something behind a champagne glass. I didn't flinch, but I felt the heat crawling up my neck. I caught Derek across the room, surrounded by board members and socialites in shimmering gowns. He hadn't seen me yet. I debated turning around, pretending I'd never stepped in. Then I heard it. Laughter. Not loud, but sharp. A woman near the entrance leaned into her date, eyes on me, smirking. That was when Derek saw me. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight across the room, ignoring the conversation he'd just stepped out of. Past the skeptics, past the donors, and stopped in front of me. Everyone fell quiet. He extended his hand. Dance with me? I blinked. Here? Yes, he said. Here. I took his hand. The string quartet picked up a slow waltz. We moved awkwardly at first. Me, trying not to step on his shoes. Him, guiding gently, as if afraid I'd disappear. But then, something shifted. People stared, but no one said a word. Not anymore. He leaned in, voice low. I never liked these parties. Why do you throw them then? I asked, half smiling. For the same reason I used to wear suits that didn't feel like mine, because it was expected. But not tonight. He pulled back slightly, meeting my eyes. Tonight, I picked. I could feel the tears prickling. Anger, pride, relief. Not because he chose me, but because for once, he chose differently. For himself. The dance ended, but no one clapped. No one dared mock now. Derek offered his arm. Come with me. Where? Anywhere the music doesn't reach. I laughed, and let him lead me out. As we stepped into the back garden, the air cooler and sweeter than the ballroom, I looked up at the sky. Clear, dark, honest. You didn't have to do that, I whispered. He didn't answer for a moment. Then, I did. Not for them. For me. Because if I keep playing their game, I'll never remember how to be real. We stood there in silence, just breathing. And though I was still the woman in the wrong dress, with the wrong shoes and 1,000 unpaid bills, I didn't feel small. I felt chosen. Not rescued, not pitied, just seen. And that made all the difference. The hospital room smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant. I stood by the window while the machines beeped their gentle rhythm behind me. Richard had fallen asleep during my last visit, a bowl of lukewarm oatmeal untouched on his tray. Today, though, he was awake, his eyes sharp but tired in a way I hadn't seen before. "You always come alone," he said. "I'm not much of a crowd," I answered, pulling the chair closer to his bedside. He nodded. "Crowds are overrated." There was a silence between us that wasn't heavy, just full, like air waiting to carry something important. "I wasn't always kind," he said suddenly, voice rasping. "Especially not to Derek's father." I looked up, surprised. "I built this empire on control, Joanna. Every decision had to make sense on paper. Feelings were liabilities. Regret? That was for weak men." He coughed, then sipped from a glass of water I handed him. "But it cost me more than I knew," he continued. "Derek's father, Martin, was brilliant, gentle in a way that scared me. He wanted to teach art. I told him art wouldn't pay the mortgage." His eyes clouded. "I crushed that dream before it had a chance, pushed him into finance, into deals, into dinners he hated. I thought I was protecting him. All I did was bury him alive in my shadow." I didn't speak, just listened. "He walked away," Richard said, softer now. "Took Derek and moved across the country. I didn't stop him, told myself it was his choice. But the truth? I couldn't face the look in his eyes anymore." He turned toward me, his gaze direct. "Derek came back here not for me, but for duty, for legacy. But I see the same weight in his shoulders I once forced onto his father, the same quiet rage beneath his calm." I felt a chill, because I'd seen it too. In the way Derek clenched his jaw when his name was used like currency, in how he avoided the piano room downstairs, the one filled with untouched sheet music. "I can't fix the past," Richard whispered. "I've tried. Money, buildings with our name. But all I want now is to make sure Derek doesn't repeat my mistakes." He closed his eyes for a moment. "I see how he looks at you." I froze. He may not understand it yet, or admit it, but you remind him of something he thought he had to give up to survive. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't used to being seen with such clarity. "I'm not asking you to save him," Richard added. "Just, if the moment ever comes, help him see what truly matters." The machines beeped steadily. The wind outside rattled the window pane. I reached for his hand. "You already helped him see it, Richard, by saying this." He smiled faintly. "Took me long enough." I sat there for a while longer, watching the man who had once ruled boardrooms now struggle to stay awake. And in that room full of quiet, I realized, sometimes the bravest thing a man can do isn't build an empire. It's admit he built part of it on someone else's broken dream. I found him in the old carriage house, sleeves rolled up, hands smeared with dust and charcoal. He didn't look up when I stepped in. The light from the high window spilled across a large canvas resting on 2 milk crates. Lines sketched in haste. Hesitation. "Looks like he never stopped painting," I said softly. Derek finally glanced at me. "He didn't. Just never showed anyone. Said it was just for air." He brushed off his hands and motioned toward a stool. I sat. "This place," he said after a long pause, "was our world before everything changed, before legacy became a chain." I let the silence settle before speaking. "I need to go," I said. He turned sharply, brows drawn. "Go?" "I wasn't supposed to stay this long," I said. "You know that." He shook his head, stepping closer. "If this is because of what the others said—" "It's not about them," I interrupted gently. Not even about your grandfather. I looked around the space. Wood beams, the smell of old varnish, a cracked photo of a boy with charcoal on his cheeks. A boy who once believed in colors. I stayed because this house, this family, in all its brokenness, gave me something I hadn't had in a long time. Hope? He asked, almost whispering. Yes. Not the loud kind that demands a spotlight, the quiet kind, the kind that comes in with the kettle whistling, or the way your grandfather waits before making a joke, to make sure I'm listening. He stepped back, pacing. But we're not done here, he said. I'm not done. You're not, I agreed. And maybe that's exactly why I need to leave. He looked confused, hurt. I didn't stay because I needed help. I stayed because I needed to remember who I was. Before the jobs, the bills, the crying in grocery store parking lots. And now that I do, I want to take that woman back to the place she lost herself. He leaned against the doorframe, silent. The tension in his shoulders wasn't anger. It was something closer to fear. I'm not leaving. Forever, I said quietly. I'm just not yours to keep. He studied me like I was another sketch he couldn't finish. I don't know how to let someone go when I've only just figured out they matter, he said. I smiled. Then don't let go. Just let me walk. A breeze stirred the curtains. The afternoon light shifted and I saw it, his face softening, like something broke loose inside him and made space. Will you at least stay for dinner? He asked. Only if you cook. His laugh was small, reluctant, but it was real. As we walked back toward the house, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. The carriage house stood quiet but full of memory, full of beginnings that had waited too long. Derek didn't speak much after that. But when he held the door open for me, there was a steadiness in his posture. Like maybe, for the first time, he didn't need to carry everything alone. And me? I knew I'd return to the neighborhood that forgot me. To the mailbox stuffed with notices, the sidewalks cracked like my confidence. But I'd be bringing someone new with me. Myself. The version of me that remembered how to make strangers laugh. The one who still believed that knocking on impossible doors sometimes leads to the only answer worth hearing. It rained the day I came back. Not the kind of violent downpour that floods streets or halts traffic, but the kind that soaks you slow, makes your clothes cling, and brings out the smell of old pavement and rust. The kind of rain that whispers, "Are you sure you're ready?" I stood outside the cracked gate of the mobile home park, the paint on the sign more peeled than I remembered. My boots sank into wet gravel. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. Not even Miss Loretta, who used to keep a jar of hard candy by her front door and always knew everything before anyone else. But I didn't come to announce a return. I came to rebuild something. My first stop was the lot where the old coffee shop used to stand. My shop. Its windows had been boarded up for months, a faint "for lease" sticker still clinging to the door like a scar. I walked around back, expecting overgrowth, maybe a raccoon. But there it was. The mural, still intact. A faded swirl of blues and oranges we'd painted with the neighborhood kids one summer. Underneath, the words we'd stenciled, "Come as you are." That was all I needed. It took 3 weeks to clean out the inside. People noticed. At first, they stared like I was some hallucination. Then they began to help. First with small things. An extension cord. A mop. Then bigger things. Folding chairs, books, even a used microwave. We turned it into more than a coffee shop. It became a room where Maya and other kids could read without being laughed at. A place where Miss Loretta could host senior story nights. A closet where old jackets became someone's first warmth of the season. I called it the second door, because sometimes the first one slams shut so hard, you forget there's another way in. One day, I was wiping down the windows when a sound stopped me cold. That engine, Low, velvet, powerful. I turned slowly. A cherry-red Ferrari was idling across the street, its windshield glistening with rain. My heart thudded. I blinked hard, almost laughed at myself. Was I really so haunted by the past that even a car could trigger me? But then, the door opened, and Derek stepped out. No umbrella, no coat. Just that same quiet stubbornness in his stance, like rain couldn't touch him. He didn't wave, didn't call out. He simply crossed the street and stood in front of me, soaked like I had once been, right before everything changed. "I didn't know if I should come," he said finally. "I didn't know if I'd want you to," I replied. We stood there like two people who had read the same book, separately, and were now flipping to the same page. "You were right," he said. "Letting someone walk isn't the same as letting them go." I opened the cafe door behind me. The warmth inside drifted out like a welcome. "Want to see what happens after the ending?" I asked. He hesitated, just a second, then stepped in. And for the first time since that terrible splash on a Tuesday morning, I realized something. The rain hadn't been trying to wash me away. It had been trying to bring something back. We didn't talk much that afternoon. I gave Derek a tour of the second door. It wasn't much. A repurposed cafe with mismatched chairs, a used bookshelf we'd sanded and painted teal, a corner labeled "Borrow and Bring Back," with neatly folded sweaters and kids' sneakers. But he walked through it like it was a museum. He stopped in front of the community board where children had pinned their drawings. Maya's picture was there, me and her holding cups of cocoa, a sun with a crooked smile above us. "She still comes here?" he asked. "Almost every day after school. She reads to the younger ones now." Derek smiled at that. A small one, but not the polite kind, the kind that escapes before you realize it. When we reached the back wall, he went silent. There, above the couch I'd rescued from a junkyard and reupholstered with fabric scraps, was a painting. A girl, standing before an iron gate, her dress soaked, her hair falling in wet curls, her eyes, not afraid, not pleading, just waiting. The mansion behind the gate was faint, almost a blur, but the girl was clear. Derek stepped closer. "That's the gate." I nodded. But the gate wasn't the destination. It was just the reminder. Of what? That we're worthy of knocking. I turned to face him then, not as the girl with wet shoes who'd been splashed in the street, not as someone he pitied, but as someone who had stopped running. And Derek, he looked different too. No suit, no crisp shirt or watch. Just a gray sweater, jeans, and the kind of vulnerability you don't wear to board meetings. His hair was damp from the rain, and he smelled like earth and wind and a long drive without air conditioning. He reached into his pocket and held something out. A handkerchief. The same one the old man had given me. Now washed, ironed, and folded with care. "I kept it," he said, even after I told myself none of it meant anything. I took it slowly, fingers trembling just a little. "Why bring it back?" "Because it didn't belong to me." He looked at me then, not like the man who used to think of me as a disruption, a charity case, or even an exception, but as someone who reminded him of who he was before the suits, before the walls, before the endless pressure to win. "I didn't stop the car that day," he said. "I saw you, and I kept driving." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "I know." He let out a breath. "But today I didn't. Today I knocked. Because I realized, if I lose the one thing that made me feel like a good man again, then what's left of me?" We stood there for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging like mist. "You know," I finally whispered, "I didn't cry because of the water that day. I cried because it felt like the world was done giving me chances." He stepped closer. Maybe the world was waiting for you to make your own. I folded the handkerchief once more, tucked it into the pocket of my apron. It wasn't just cloth anymore. It was proof that sometimes people do come back. The ribbon was red, not fancy silk, just thick construction tape we painted the night before. Tilly had added glitter to it, saying it needed to sparkle for the photos. It was a sunny Saturday in May, the kind of day that felt like forgiveness. Like maybe winter hadn't won this time. There were paper lanterns swaying under the porch beams, donated cupcakes from the local bakery, and a giant pot of lemonade someone's uncle kept topping off with way too much sugar. Children ran across the gravel lot, their shoes dusty and faces sticky. Laughter bounced off the mobile homes like music. And in the middle of it all, I stood holding a pair of scissors too big for my hand, wondering how in the world I got here. Tilly tugged on my sleeve. "You nervous?" I looked down at her, hair braided into two little loops, cheeks flushed, wearing a dress I once wore at her age. She was growing fast. Too fast. "A little," I said. "Are you ready?" She held up a folded sheet of paper. I practiced twice in the mirror. I only cried one of the times. I smiled. That's already better than me. Behind her, Derek was talking to a group of volunteers. He was dressed like he'd always belonged here, worn boots, rolled up sleeves, and sawdust still clinging to his jeans. He didn't look like the man in the boardroom anymore. He looked like someone who'd finally chosen where to stand. And he stood next to us. I stepped up to the small wooden podium, actually an old bookshelf turned upright, and cleared my throat. The crowd hushed. "I don't have a speech," I said. "Just a thank you. For showing up. For believing this place could be more than a patch of cracked concrete and rusted fences." Some people clapped. Others just nodded. "Now, someone much braver than me has something to say," I added. "She's the reason I came back. And she's the reason I stayed." Tilly walked up, unfolded her paper, and took a deep breath. Her voice was small at first, then steadier with each word. "My mom once told me that some doors don't need a key, that if you believe hard enough and knock loud enough, someone will open it. Maybe not the first time, or the second, but someday." She paused, glancing at me. She said, "Sometimes you have to be the one who opens it, even when you're scared, even when the door looks way too big." The air shifted, like everyone collectively leaned in. "I think this place is that kind of door," she said, "and I think we're the people brave enough to walk through it." Someone in the back clapped, then another, until the whole crowd was applauding, not politely, but like they meant it. Like they'd just remembered something they didn't know they'd forgotten. I stepped forward, Tilly at my side, Derek behind me. The scissors felt less heavy now. And as I cut through the ribbon, I whispered, not to anyone in particular, "We're home." The sun was dipping low when the last guest left. The community center still smelled like lemonade and sawdust. Balloons bobbed on strings tied to folding chairs. Someone had forgotten their sunglasses on the snack table. It felt like the end of something beautiful, but not final. More like the end of a first chapter. Derek found me by the porch steps. He held a small wooden box, the size of his palm, carved with ivy leaves. I raised an eyebrow, half joking. "Please tell me it's not a ring." He chuckled. "Do I look like someone who rushes into things?" "No," I smiled. "You look like someone who's finally learned to stay." He handed me the box, his fingers brushing mine. "Just open it." Inside, there was no velvet, no diamond, just a single folded note. I held my breath as I opened it. It read, "This time, you knocked, not because the world pushed you, but because you finally chose to walk in." I didn't realize I was crying until a tear dropped onto the paper. Derek didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I looked up at him, voice shaking. Why me? He didn't hesitate. Because you didn't wait for someone to save you. You knocked. You kept knocking. And then, you opened the door for others. I folded the note gently, placed it back in the box, and held it to my chest. That night, after everyone left, I walked alone down the dirt road behind the center. The sky had turned watercolor, pinks and oranges bleeding into blue. Fireflies danced in the tall grass. It reminded me of that first day, when the Ferrari splashed through a puddle and soaked me head to toe. Funny how that moment used to feel like an ending. But now I see it clearly. It wasn't the water. It wasn't the car. It was everything before it. The silence of unpaid bills, the hollow refrigerator, the rejection letter, the teacher's cold eyes telling me my daughter didn't belong, my mother's breath growing shallower by the day. The splash was just the final drop, the one that made the glass overflow. And maybe that's what I needed, to finally stop holding it all in, to cry, to break, to kneel on a street corner, soaked and shaking, and finally whisper, "Help." But no one saved me that day. An old man offered a handkerchief. A gate happened to be open. But I knocked. I walked in. And later, when it got hard again, when I could have disappeared, I stayed. Not because anyone asked me to, but because this time, I wanted to. Some doors look massive, heavy, locked. But sometimes all they need is someone who's brave enough to knock and believe they belong on the other side.